And joining me now is the House Republican leader, Congressman Kevin McCarthy of California. Congressman, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Well, Chuck, thanks for having me back.
All right, on day one of the shutdown, the president had a deal in front of him that was essentially a continuing resolutions for 3 weeks. No wall. That's the deal he agreed to on day 35. What was accomplished?
Well, nobody likes to go into a shutdown, but the one thing I would see, especially if you're looking at winners and losers, I don't know why someone would celebrate a status quo. I watched the president in every one of these meetings offer a reasonable solution. I watched then leader Pelosi spend a new historical time on the floor of the House, 8 hours talking about DACA. We don't have the DACA solution solved when we could have. We still have a problem at the border. We don't have that solved. And now we got 3 more weeks to go. I watched Speaker Pelosi sit there and would not negotiate with anything. So I give President Trump a lot of credit. He put the American people before politics. He said, if you want to negotiate...
After 35 days?
No, he did.
For 35 days, though, what did he get?
Well, I'm not celebrating getting something because what people are celebrating, saying Speaker Pelosi is strong because she got status quo, that's not what the country wants. Country wants to find common ground. The president made 4 different offers. It was Speaker Pelosi who said I wouldn't talk about anything. So when you think about 35 days, we've got 35 days of Speaker Pelosi not negotiating. And the president finally said, this is too much. If you say you'll do something else, I'll open it up so the federal workers will be paid, and let's see where you'll go in 3 weeks.
Well, that was her stance. She'll negotiate after you open up the government.
No, her stance was not $1 for a wall, we're not going to do anything, that it's immoral. And I don't believe that's where her members are as well. Because if you listen to her own chair of agriculture, said give Trump the money. Her chairman of armed services says walls work. Even her number 2 says walls are not immoral. She is out of step with her own base.
In 3 weeks,
yes,
the president is unlikely to, I mean, do you really believe you're going to get a grand compromise that somehow Democrats will trade something temporary for something permanent? A permanent structure for temporary relief for some of these folks. Do you really believe that'll happen in 3 weeks?
Well, if Democrats have always in the past voted for some barrier, and now they're not going to because it's being offered by President Trump, that's politics. That means we'd still have a crisis at our border. If in 3 weeks they said before, if you open it up, then we'll negotiate, they won't, they're the ones causing the problem. They have changed the course of what they voted for in the past. Speaker Pelosi had voted for a wall and barrier. Schumer had voted for a wall and barrier. But now they will not, because it's President Trump. I think that's wrong.
The Gang of 8 bill, the infamous Gang of 8 bill that you guys in the House never brought to a vote, did have extra fencing in it. I believe it was 350 miles of extra fencing. Had $46 billion in border security. What's wrong with Gang of 8 being the beginning of the negotiations?
Last year, I spent more than a month every single day in my office with Durbin, with Steny, with the chief of staff of the White House, and we tried to come together on an immigration bill. It's one of the hardest things ever to do. But when I see a crisis on the border, 500,000 people illegally enter our country, when we were the most liberal, bringing in 1 million new people every year, the way we should do it, I think this is an opportunity to not only solve a border crisis, but we've got kids here dealing with DACA. They're both big issues. Solve them right now.
Look, the only way to make it happen is if both sides are willing to buck their base.
Yeah.
Is the president actually willing to buck his base? He's never given an indication he is. He's threatening a national emergency.
That is not true. The president is the only one who has been reasonable in these negotiations. And Chuck, I've been in every single meeting, so I watched it. The president is the one who offered. This president is the one who at the State of the Union went further on immigration than I've heard from a President Clinton or even President Obama. So no, that is unfair. It was only the Democrats who would interject when the Secretary of Homeland tried to talk about the current crisis. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to negotiate. They said nothing. It was the president that offered 4 different plans. Yeah, that moved further than I think this party has even looked.
Well, let me ask you this. I want to play something from you.
Please.
In November of 2016.
I always love when I get
I know you love this stuff. Because I think it's going to beg the question of what the heck took you guys so long. Take a listen.
And I put together the team, actually with the speaker and others, our staff, working on legislation now. So when we're sworn in, not waiting till when the president is sworn in, but at the very first week of January, how we are able to move the legislation needed to start building the wall.
At the end of the day, why should Democrats bail out your party that had 2 years to figure out a way forward here? You said you were going to have legislation ready to go in 2017. What happened?
We did. If you look at the appropriations, we are building the wall right now, a portion of it. We have to go further.
Then why did he shut down the government?
He did not shut down the government. Let's be very clear. We were in the House, in the majority. We moved a bill to the Senate. You know as well as everybody else in America, it takes 60 votes. Schumer is the one who said no. So you put it on the Republican.
DACA for the walls, the president backed away from.
No. We passed this at the end of last year. Money for the wall, more money because we're already building it. We put another $5 billion in there. The Senate had a different version, and Schumer said no, so it got shut down. Then what happened? The president stayed in Washington. The speaker then went to Hawaii. The president stayed there to negotiate. We brought meetings down. They said they wouldn't talk about anything. We got into a shutdown that lasted longer ever before. The president made 4 different offers that were reasonable.
Not until after he shut down the government.
He didn't shut it down.
He's the one that said he'd be proud to own it. Who else did it? He rejected the Senate bill to keep the government open.
No. The House had a bill. The Senate had a bill. Like every other piece of legislation, it takes 60 votes in the Senate. Republicans don't have 60 in the Senate. So I think it would only be fair, Chuck, to understand that if it takes 60 votes in the Senate, there's probably blame on both sides.
All right, let's talk about this. In 3 weeks.
Yes.
When I think you guys pass something that keeps the government open, I'm guessing you guys don't want to go through another government shutdown. A bunch of senators want to basically make it impossible to shut down the government, Senator Portman's got a bill, Senator Warner's got a bill, but all of them is basically never to cancel a paycheck again for a non-political appointee. Will you support something like that?
Yeah, but I'll go further. You want to know how you'll never have a shutdown again? Let's not pay the members of Congress and Senate.
That's the Mark Warner bill.
That's the
and
bill.
the White House,
That's
right?
the bill I would put in.
All political staff.
That's the amendment
bill.
I would offer. Because this only harms others. But think about this. The president offered 4 different reasonable attacks. The Speaker Pelosi, then leader, has the record for the longest speech on the floor, more than 8 hours. Yeah. Just 1 year ago, next month, about DACA. He took 2 issues that are a problem, and he wanted to solve it. Today, you're trying to celebrate and say, Speaker Pelosi is some type of winner in this? Yeah. No, that means status quo. That goes against everything we know and we want for America. We want to find common ground and solutions.
Very quickly, yes. You have not appointed all members of the House Intelligence Committee on the Republican side.
I will next week. Well,
some people think it's helping to delay the transcripts that could get sent to Mueller.
No, nothing of the sort. The reason why committees weren't already appointed, the Democrats were not organized. They waited till after the speaker race, which Republicans would never do, to give us the ratios. I have just now met.
Intel is always the same ratio, though, in fairness.
No, we had negotiations with the speaker changing. I just met with every single individual that I'm going to appoint on Friday, so it'll come out next week.
All right. Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California. Good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.